Hey, Bulls and Bears, I've just changed my 2024 economic outlook. Some people may call it a forecast, outlook, forecast, prediction, whatever you want to call it. I want to give you my take on things. All right, so let's get into it. Please hit that like button and give this video a little bit of traction to help us stay alive, basically, on this channel, on this network here. 2024. What do we see down the pipeline? Well, I could be like every other YouTube economist out there, and I don't consider myself an economist really. I just consider myself someone that likes to talk about the economy, that researches a lot about the economy, and invest. I do try to invest too. We'll talk about that here in a little bit because there was a question that a couple people had. But first, 2024, I might be one of the only YouTubers out there not predicting a price collapse. Not predicting a price collapse. Pretty much every other YouTube economist, financial channel that I see saying that it's going to be a collapse, it's going to crash. I don't see that happening. Here's one example. US oil output skyrocketed because of the rise in oil costs. We now are the number one producer of oil once again. Remember, there was this huge cutback initially, the green movement, and all this talk about the environment, that we need to stop producing oil, stop using oil, go all electric. Take a look at this article right here. Top 5 oil producers 2023. The U.S. number 1. So we've ramped production back up here. U.S. oil production reached a record high of over 13 million barrels per day in September, surpassing all other countries. So we're ramping up. Some people say it's just because 2024, it's a selection year, so they're saying that. But U.S. number 1, Saudi Arabia number 2, Russia number 3, Canada number 4, Iraq number 5. So you may say, well, how does that tie in with the economic forecast for 2024? The point of that is, and me bringing that up is, I don't know what to believe anymore. On one hand, the powers that be, the central planners are out there saying we need to cut back on oil, we need to go to clean energy, but now all of a sudden we've ramped up production, right? So you really can't believe much of what you're told, uh, and that's, I encourage everyone, even myself, what I'm telling you. A lot of it's my opinion. I don't just take wild guesses out of nowhere, though. I try to put the pieces together, the pieces of the puzzle, via news and information and data and charts. So I'm not just throwing darts, blindly at a dartboard. I'm, making my outlook, putting my outlook out there based on data and information. So if we're told that we're going to cut back on oil and try to eliminate oil, but then we have production gets ramped up, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. Hopefully prices will come down. Hopefully we won't see 450 gallon of gas here in California like we've been seeing. But the interesting part is, even though we've ramped up production, we have still way over $4 a gallon of gas here in California. And I think most of you would agree that prices are still much higher than they were just a few years ago. So the number one oil producer still has these elevated prices. A lot of it's price gouging, right? A lot of it is corporate greed. A lot of companies out there use the excuse of shortages, the pandemic, all these other things, supply chain disruptions, all the above. They use those uh, excuses to keep prices elevated. Same thing with used cars. We were told that there was this big glut, or we were told, no, first we were told there was a shortage of used cars. Now we find out there's not a shortage, but the dealers still aren't bringing prices down. Now I've connected that dot here several times. Let me just do it again real quick. The reason dealers have not been forced to cut prices is because people can still take out loans. Banks are being propped up. And we'll get to that here in a few minutes. The bank bailouts continued to increase again last week. They're not calling it a bailout, so 99.9% of the population has no idea that the banks are being emergency liquefied right now. Emergency funding is happening because so many people are pulling their money out of the bank, right? And we're going to get more into that here in just a few moments. But something else, too, we have to talk about is de-dollarization, and it is continuing. And today we saw another drop in the U.S. dollar index. And here's another recent bit of news here on that front. Let's bring this up here. Russia and Iran officially ditch US dollar for trade. Does anyone think it's going to stop at just these two countries and the other BRICS alliance countries? No, this is going to expand because countries around the world are realizing that we're basically abusing our privilege of having the US or having the US dollar be the world reserve currency. We're abusing our privilege. So what we need to start doing is start producing and manufacturing things here in the US. Otherwise, we're going to see inflation take off. Now, my prediction is there's not going to be a collapse in 2024. Rather, we're going to see more inflation and prices increasing. Um, Home prices, I think, are going to still go down, but it will not be a crash like many people have predicted, unless there's a big shift or change in the banking system. So let's say you have a bunch of bank failures happen and then new regulations get implemented where the banks cannot loan out money like they've been loaning out. That would be a major structural shift in the way money is loaned out. So something like that would be more of like a once in a century uh, situation, right? Something that we haven't seen. Even in 2008, they didn't drastically change the lending system. They came out with some new regulations, Dodd-Frank, but look where we're at today. So were those things that were passed after 2008, were those things really effective? And they did they really change the way money's loaned out? No, it's actually much worse today than it was back then. So you could argue that not only did we regulate or did we not regulate enough, um, we actually loosened the guidelines so banks could loan out more money. We printed more money. We had lower interest rates for longer. We are allowing the banks to loan out even more money versus how much they have. We have a zero reserve requirement. So all these changes made this bubble much bigger than we saw in 2008. Do I think that's going to end in 2024? No, I don't think so. In fact, I think they're going to ramp it up because they want 2024 to look like a very good economic year for obvious reasons. 2024, this thing happens every 4 years where you get a new person out there, or maybe the same person comes back for a second term, and people say, "Oh yeah, everything's gonna be great. Look, we solved it. We've got this new person here who's gonna change everything around." And sure, they'll do this, they'll do that, they'll do a couple changes, but nothing major structurally ever changes with the financial system, with the monetary system, right? So that's what I see in 2024. I see prices going up. Actually, I see inflation. Home prices will still come down. Car prices still come down. There are some bubbles that will continue to deflate, but not a collapse that I think a lot of people out there are predicting. But there are a few wild cards. You know, I always have to bring up the wild cards because after 2020, people realized that anything's possible, anything could happen. No one ever thought we'd see worldwide lockdowns and shortages, yet that's what happened. What could happen in 2024? Well, let's go back to the banking regulation here in a minute, and let's talk about the bank funding program, which they're not calling a bailout. The bank term funding program, according to Bloomberg here, that program, what's keeping banks alive right now, you would have seen hundreds of banks fail by now if it weren't for this. This is the rescue program. Bloomberg, the Fed likely to end, and the key word here is likely, likely to end bank funding program in March. Does anyone think that they brought this program out in March of 2023 as an emergency because of the bank failures? And it was supposed to be temporary. Here we are nearly a year later and it's still going. Does anyone think that we're magically going to come off of this in March just because it's a 1 year mark? And the amount that we're pumping into these banks to keep them operational is actually increasing. I've got a chart here. Let me just pull it up. These are the unrealized losses at the banks. And we say unrealized is because they're not realized unless the bank has to sell these underwater assets. In this case, look at on the right edge here, the past few months here versus 2008. You can see how much worse it is. So when do unrealized losses become realized? And that's when they matter. So when does that happen? That happens when the banks have to sell because they need emergency funding. Well, we don't have the reason for the banks to sell. They don't have that reason now, is because they have this emergency money coming in from the Fed emergency program. You see what's happening here? So the banks are being propped up, even though we see the biggest losses of all time amongst the bank. And yes, they're unrealized losses, and they're only able to remain unrealized because we have an emergency bailout program happening. So if that ends, and that's the wild card, if that does end in March, like Bloomberg is putting out there, that's something big. That's something huge that's going to knock the financial system upside down. And then you will see a crash and you will see deflation. When banks stop lending, folks, look out below, because the housing bubble doesn't just decline, it crashes. The car market, automobile prices, doesn't just decline, it crashes. Almost a straight down line when the banks stop lending. If we see all these banks fail, like already have failed. They're just being rescued right now. Straight down decline if that happens. That's the wild card. No one can predict what type of programs or rescues will continue. Maybe a few people can predict that. Maybe the people working at the central bank or something like that. But other than that, the average person, you and I, we're sitting here, looking at all this information, just having to scratch our head and guess, and trying to position ourselves for a what if scenario that we don't know what the outcome is going to be. Again, people have been saying crash, 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 crash for years, because all they're doing is they're looking at how much higher prices are now versus where they were back in the last crash. And of course, they're going to say that every year. And maybe one year they'll be right because one of these wild cards will pop up. So we have to talk about the wild cards. We don't just want to say there's going to be a crash every year and yet it doesn't happen, because we have to look at the reasons why the crash happened back then, because banks stopped lending. When the money stops flowing, when banks stop lending, that's when the bubbles pop and prices collapse, and you see a uh, a big economic downturn, a big shift to the downside. Right now, they can just keep funding the banks. Banks continue to loan out money. People today are still buying houses. Yes, home sales are at all-time lows when you look at the yearly numbers, but prices aren't collapsing because there's still people able to borrow money. Demand is really low, so you don't have to have that many houses on the market to keep prices propped up. But this is the way it's going to be, folks. But let's talk about a few other things here next. And let's talk about sound money. People want to ask me, or people have been asking me, okay, what good's all this news if we don't know how to benefit from it, if we don't know how to invest? Folks, I've shared every one of my trades this year, and I'm up several 100%. I'd have to look. The Carvana trade, the goldminingstock.com trade, the shorting the retailers from a few months ago, I'm up a lot, right? I didn't put a lot of money into the market, but what I did invest in, I'm up several 100%. I'd have to look. I think it's between 300 and 400%. Um, Sound money, that's another long-term investment that hasn't shown its value yet, but prices are about to take off in precious metals, folks, because what these other countries are doing, implementing precious metals into their trades, into their currencies, and ditching the US dollar at the same time. So now we have the latest. Walmart is selling gold and silver. Are you awake yet? We're not just talking about jewelry, we're talking about bullion, bars. So people are bracing for this. These stores that are selling these, Costco, and now even Walmart, see what's happening with the demand. Right now, the price is being suppressed for the same reasons that the banks are being funded right now, because they can print this money at will and keep the prices suppressed by selling contracts on the paper market, right? They're basically controlling the price of the physical asset with derivatives and contracts, the paper market, right? That's what's happening right now. Banks are accumulating a lot of metals right now, the most we've ever seen. 2023 set a new record. Why are they doing that? At the same time as why are prices being held down? So they can buy more or cheaper. And ultimately, the price is going to be unleashed, and you're going to see your silver, your metals investments skyrocket, right? That's another prediction for 2024. Big upside in precious metals, gold and silver both. So if you want to talk about investing and you want to say that I never give you advice, pretty much every week I remind people of this long-term investment and other short-term investments as they come up. But I'm very careful and picky about what I invest in. I only invest in a no-brainer, can't lose situation. I think that's why I've done pretty well. So, all right, folks, we're going to wrap this up. What do you see for 2024? I don't see any crashes unless a major structural change happens. Will there be a major structural change? Will it be something else like war, like an attack, like an outage, like a blackout? The banks go dark because of some attack from some other hostile nation. And there's a lot of hostile nations out there. The red flags are everywhere. So brace for impact. But other than a massive deflationary scare situation or structural change in the system, I don't see any collapse. You know what I'm saying? All right. What do you think about this, folks? Please let me know down below. Big love as always. Keep stacking. Bye for now. We'll see you here next time. Peace.